Welcome to Environmental Fridays. It is Personal Season 4. This season will be featuring 16 episodes with 16 guest speakers from Arizona, Barbados, Georgia, Grenada, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Mexico, New Jersey, Ohio, Tobago, Trinidad, and the United Kingdom. Thank you to all our guest speakers. Now here's our host, Dr. Desmond Hartwell Murray. And this week's guest co-host, Sean Cuffy Young. And this week's guest speaker, Matthew Maas.
Yes, okay. So we want to welcome everyone to Environmental Fridays. It is personal. This is season 4. Today is episode 6, and we have some really cool things in store for you and a really huge surprise. So buckle up. So if you want to learn more about Environmental Fridays, we have a website, www.theenvironmentalfridays.com. www.theenvironmentalfridays.com. Next week, our episode 7, is going to deal with the environmental impact of the fashion industry. It's a huge contributor to pollution around the world. And our speaker is an expert in that. He's written at least 6 books about fashion pollution and the fashion industry. So we have an expert in that area speaking to us next week. And the surprise, we have a special guest with us next week. I don't know if some of you recognize the face, but she is Miss Janelle Penny Commigion, and she was the Miss Universe 1977, the first Black woman to be in that position. And you will be hearing a lot more, but she will be with us next week. Needless to say, I'm very excited about that. All right, so this week, my co-host is Sean. I'm just learning to pronounce her name properly. She is the founder and CEO, principal and consultant of CL, I think, Environmental Services in Trinidad, Tacarigua, Trinidad. She is an award-winning waste management educator, consultant, and social entrepreneur. She obtained her master's in environmental engineering and was a Fulbright Humphrey fellow at Cornell University, where she specialized in climate change policy and natural resource management. She has over 17 years in this field, experience in this field, and is a consultant on waste education, literacy, circular economy, waste reduction, and other projects in that area. Today, it's my pleasure to have her be with us here as our co-host. So Sean, the time is yours to introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you very much, Desmond, and a warm welcome to everyone, and good morning. It is my pleasure to be able to co-host this episode 6 of Environmental Fridays, and today we are going to hear from Matthew Maas. Matthew is the director of the Environmental Resources Training Center at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. and he's going to share a bit more with us about his work. Matthew obtained a BSc in biology from Coastal Carolina University, Conway, South Carolina in 2021. He has certifications as a drinking water operator and a wastewater operator. So do I, Matthew, a basic wastewater plant operator, that is, and serves on the exam review committees for these certifications in Illinois. He has 20 years of experience, practical and management experience in operations, water quality, and environmental science. And as the operations manager in Sacramento, Matt was responsible for 12 districts and 125 sites. Matt, that sounds like a lot. As a water quality supervisor in Missouri, he has overseen $40 million plant renovations in 2011 at the Joplin tornado response. And additionally, he has led a collaboration effort with the SMUD on the water energy nexus. This resulted in the development of an automated demand response system that can modify water pressure zones based on energy availability. So Matthew, thank you so very much for agreeing to be a part of Environmental Fridays, and I hand the floor right on over to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sean, thank you so much. That was a beautiful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and if I can just get a thumbs up from anybody saying that we're in the good.
We're good. We
All
are
right.
we are seeing you up. Okay, there you go. Full screen now. Good.
Okay. So I'll begin just kind of briefly. Sean did a great job of hitting up kind of a lot of my kind of key points. And so I'll spend just a little bit more time kind of mentioning my progression, because it really was kind of a weird progression. Anytime you're talking utilities or water or wastewater, electrical, gas, it's very rare. I mean, it does happen, but a lot of times people just kind of fall into it. It's very out of sight, out of mind when you're talking about the utilities industry. I'm not going to say it's thankless, but it is definitely a situation where, generally speaking, people won't call you to say, hey, I turned on the water faucet and the water's running, thank you so much, or I flushed the toilet and it went away, I appreciate it, right? Generally speaking, you're only hearing about when there are issues. So it's kind of a weird industry to get into, but it's also a very, very rewarding industry, because it really is just constantly helping people. It never goes away, 365 days. Anytime that there's a problem, I'll guarantee it happens on Thanksgiving, Christmas, or New Year's, just kind of the way that it works out, right? But it was a career that I really, really enjoyed. And so I kind of started out, after graduating from Coastal Carolina University, I started out and I worked with Missouri American Water in St. Louis. And I started out just as a laboratory technician, just running water quality samples. Shortly thereafter, I transferred to Joplin, Missouri, and I was there for about 3 years as the water quality supervisor for that district. At that point, I transferred back when a position became open in St. Louis. So I transferred back as a water quality supervisor in St. Louis, did that position for a few years, and then was offered a position with California American Water in Sacramento as an operations manager. Had that position for about 2.5, or actually, yeah, right around 2.5 years. And then kind of went the route of, I was really, really missing home, I guess would be the best way to put it. I absolutely adored my time in California. I loved working with American Water. I loved working with California American Water, but just constantly seeing my nieces and nephews go through their birthdays and missing those constantly started wearing on me a little bit. No one ever gets younger, everybody just gets older. And so you start missing out on that time and it starts bothering you. And so I made the decision to come back to the Midwest. And I came back to the Midwest in this capacity, leaving American Water and coming to the Environmental Resources Training Center. So that brings you to where we're starting here on the title page. In the background there, you can kind of see a faded background of our center. And I'm just going to kind of get right into describing what we are, what we do, how we came about. I never like just doing a straight sales pitch on a program. And so kind of the way that I've got this kind of melded together is, as I go along, it's going to be combo sales pitch, just talking about the industry. We'll talk regulations, we'll talk operations, we'll talk laboratory, we'll talk a lot of different paths, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end for discussion. Additionally, I'm a teacher. I constantly am getting asked questions right in the middle of my presentation. So as we're going through this at any time, if you just want to chime in, I'm more than happy to answer any question that you might have. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So I guess kind of the key point is just to say, okay, Matt, you talked water and wastewater in your upbringing. So what is the Environmental Resources Training Center? Well, we are a very, like a really, really niche industry. And what we do is we train students, and so either people wanting to become operators or current operators in all aspects of water and wastewater. And so this is a picture of our facility. It is equipped with a drinking water laboratory and a wastewater laboratory, a large auditorium along with numerous classrooms. And what separates our program from so many other similar programs throughout the United States is we actually have a 30,000 gallon per day working. It's basically just a training scale water treatment plant, water and wastewater plant that we refer to as just our pilot plant. And so we have the opportunity of not just teaching students the theory behind stuff in the classroom, but actually taking that theory and putting it into practice in either our laboratories or in that pilot plant itself. Additionally, and I'll get into this one a little bit more too, we also have the availability of utilizing our 600,000 gallon per day university wastewater treatment plant. So I guess a good place to start would be to kind of start at the beginning. And we'll start by just discussing quickly wastewater and drinking water regulations and kind of the inception of how they came about. And this is a depiction of a 1952 incident, and this would have been the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland. And yeah, that is a tugboat and some people on a bridge that are trying to put out a fire that is on top of the river. So believe it was probably around 12 different times in the 50s and 60s that the Cuyahoga River did catch fire. And it was one of those situations where it wasn't until 1969 when a Time article was written about it, where it really started gaining national attention. And Cleveland has kind of always been the poster child for this particular incident with the amount of times this happened on the Cuyahoga River. But just so that everybody's aware, this wasn't something that was just isolated to Cleveland. This was happening in other places also. And really it was just a product of non-controlled discharge into the bodies of the US. And so in this situation, the one that really gained the steam from the 1969 Time article was a situation where it was something as simple as a train that was passing by along the river, sparks came up from the tracks, you had some oil-soaked debris that was floating on top of the river, and that's what actually caught that river on fire in the 1969 incident that stemmed that Time article. So obviously, when you start looking into it, we can't have situations like this happening on a regular basis. And so we finally started getting wise in the US, and we decided that we were going to come up with the Clean Water Act. And that Clean Water Act came into play in 1972. And essentially what it did was it just established some sort of basic structure for discharge of pollutants into the waters of the US. And what we mean by basic structure is some sort of treatment and some sort of monitoring and reporting of what was being discharged to these waters. So when we came up with the Clean Water Act, and we were doing our best to protect the water that was discharged to the environment, doing our best to protect the environment, we kind of sat back and thought a little bit and said, well, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea if we also had some way to protect the water that people were consuming on a regular basis, that water that's distributed to the general public. And so Clean Water Act came first in 1972, but shortly thereafter, Congress went the drinking water route, and they implemented the Safe Drinking Water Act. And this was basically established to protect public health by regulating nation's drinking water supplies. And this is a situation where unless you are just operating off of your own private well, you will fall under this Safe Drinking Water Act. So you do have to abide by this anytime that you are creating any sort of water that is distributed to others or the public. So we had the Clean Water Act in 1972. We had the Safe Drinking Water Act in 1974. All of this got rolled out by the federal EPA, and kind of the way that the regulatory structure works is things come out at the federal level, and then they can get passed down to the state level through an act of primacy. So basically, that state level can kind of take control of primacy with respect to enforcing those regulations, and that's the route that the state that I'm in currently, Illinois, that's the route that they ended up taking. And so they began coming up with programs, needed to find some way to prove that they had competent water and wastewater operators. And so they began coming up with a process of a water and wastewater certification program, and decided they needed some sort of training to go along with that. So that's where kind of the Environmental Resources Training Center came about. We received an Illinois EPA grant in 1975, and it was a facilities grant. So it was not only just for construction of the building itself, but also for construction of the pilot plant and the laboratories inside. And it was awarded to Southern Illinois University Edwardsville for the sole purpose of creating this water wastewater operational training center. Now, anytime I say training center, or anytime I see training with respect to people, it always makes me laugh, just because of a former coworker I worked with. And his comment was always, Matt, that should be education center. We train dogs, we educate people, was kind of always his rationale. And I would wholeheartely agree with that, but still, instead of writing education center on here, I went with operational training center. So after the building was established, then they started putting together the program itself. And our flagship at the Environmental Resources Training Center, we're kind of involved in a lot of different things throughout the state of Illinois with respect to water and wastewater training. But our flagship program, the reason that we were brought about in the first place, was our one-year water quality control operations program. And so they went through the process of developing this one-year program. The program first year was offered in fall of 1981, and that first graduating class graduated in the spring of 1982. Now we've had a graduating class every year since then. It's been a very, very strong program, and it's been very, very successful. And I'll kind of dive into how it works and why it's been successful for students up to this point. So if you were to look at the state of Illinois and you were to think, okay, where would be the best place to put a statewide training hub? That little orange down at the bottom, that's Madison County. That's where the training hub actually exists. Now, to me personally, initially, it didn't make a lot of sense as to why it was located where it was located, because 22% of the state's population is located in the Chicago area. So that would have made sense to me. We would put a training location where we would be able to service the largest amount of population. Putting something more centrally located and maybe having it work with the capital, Springfield, and where the IEPA headquarters is located, that would make sense to me. But they ended up putting it down south at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. And in doing some research and talking with people previously, there were really two main reasons that they went the route that they went with this one. First, they wanted to work with a major state university. They wanted it to be tied to some sort of major state university, but there's still plenty of options, Central Illinois or Northern Illinois up closer to Chicago. So that wasn't really the true deciding factor. The true deciding factor was they wanted a university that had its own wastewater system. And the main rationale for that was they didn't want to have to deal with both coordination of a university and a coordination of a municipality in order to make this program work. And so by utilizing a university that had its own wastewater system, they don't have two different things that they're trying to coordinate. They really only have to work with Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. They can ideally work the program as well as work the supply, which is that wastewater system that we utilize. So as far as location with respect to the state, we're down south, and with respect to the location of the school, we are actually on the extreme north end of campus. So we are basically away from all of the action. And the main reason that we're away from all of the action is because in order for our pilot plant to work properly, we needed to be close to that SIUE wastewater treatment plant. So essentially what we're doing at the Environmental Resources Training Center, if you were to just walk out our back door and walk down 100 yards, you would run into our SIUE wastewater treatment plant. And what we do is when we're referring to our wastewater pilot plant, we intercept water from their primary clarifier and we bring that up for our training purposes. And when we're talking about our drinking water training plant, we intercept water from our secondary clarifier and bring that portion up for our training purposes. And the reason that obviously the primary clarifier, it's going to be what would most represent actual wastewater influent once you get past the bar screening process and the grit chambers. And then with respect to the secondary clarifier, That's water that's going to most represent what you would find in a river, lake, or stream, which is why we utilize that for our drinking water plant portion. So when you're talking about our program categories, I kind of hit on that that our flagship is that one-year water quality control operations program, but we also have a few other little niches that we live in. And so pre-service water and wastewater education, when I utilize the term pre-service, what I'm talking about is entry level. So these are people that don't have any type of licensing or any type of experience yet. And that's generally the type of student that will go through our water quality control operations program. And so they are just looking for initial licenses, initial training. They can go through our program and they'll get entry-level jobs, but they kind of have a leg up on everybody that they're competing against with respect to those entry-level jobs. And I'll get into why I hit on that in just a second. With respect to the in-service, those are going to be the operators that already have their licenses. And so a lot of times they'll want advancements in licensing. A lot of times their pay is based off of the license that they have. So they might be doing that for promotional purposes. They may want to potentially move up or work in a different municipality. And so the licensing requirements may be different based off of the class of their plant. And so there's many reasons why they would want some sort of advancements in licensing. Additionally, in the state of Illinois and pretty much in every other state throughout the United States, there's going to be some sort of continuing education requirement that goes along with carrying one of these water or wastewater licenses. And so just as an example, in the state of Illinois, whether you're on the drinking water or the wastewater side, you're going to need anywhere from 15 hours for a lower level to 30 hours for a higher level of continuing education training every 3 years when you renew. And so that is a requirement, and that's the service that we provide for these water and wastewater operators that are already on the in-service side. And then kind of the last little realm that we live in is plumber's education. And through an interagency agreement with Illinois EPA, we actually train plumbers on cross-connection control device inspection. And we'll also utilize throughout February, March, and April, utilize our facilities for plumbers continuing education. And so we'll talk a little bit about just any advancements in the area, anything that they need. Generally speaking, in the state of Illinois, if they're just a traditional plumber, they'll need to get anywhere from 4, 8, or 12 hours of certification, depending on their levels. So now we'll actually get into our water quality control operations program. And so this is kind of just a ground level shot of our pilot plant. If you're looking and you're seeing green, generally speaking, well, I guess the two blues that are sitting right in front of us that are sitting on the floor, those are technically wastewater collection system. But generally speaking, if you're looking at green on the stuff that's in the background, those are going to be wastewater related. If you see blue, that's going to be drinking water related. And so this was the pilot plant that was constructed with that initial grant that came from IEPA. And this is kind of what sets us apart. All of the treatment train and processes are exactly what you would find at a typical water and wastewater plant. We're just operating on a very, very small scale. And so anytime we take our students out on field trips, that's one thing that I always really like pointing out to them is, hey, look at our flash mix, or look at the flash mix at Missouri American Water that has a 250 million gallon a day treatment plant. It's exactly the same as our flash mix. It's just way, way bigger. And so it really is just a matter of scale with respect to the training. And so all of our students are really, really well prepared for their involvement in the water and wastewater field upon graduation. So here's kind of our schedule. And anytime I start talking about the schedule, I do like mentioning that you'll notice this is not like a typical college schedule. And this is because we're not a typical college program / department. And even though we are part of Southern Illinois University Edwardsville, and we do roll and report up through the School of Engineering, we're not credited. And so we kind of act just as a vocational trade school, would be a better designation for us with respect to what we do. And so you'll see the schedule that we operate on is kind of like, basically like having a part-time job. It is a very, very intense schedule for our students. And it is a strong, strong time commitment for our students to go through our program. That being said, it is a $10,000 a year program that start to finish in about an 11-month period you can almost jump immediately into, especially here in like the Metro St. Louis area of Illinois or St. Louis, Missouri, you could be looking at $55,000, $60,000, $65,000 a year starting out for a relatively small initial investment and a pretty quick turnaround with respect to just that 11-month time frame. So here's kind of our breakdown. Traditional fall and spring semesters, our fall and spring semesters mirror that of the university. And at the end of both December and May, our students will take the finals for our program, but then they'll also start taking certification exam testing in the state of Illinois and the state of Missouri in order to become certified water and wastewater operators. The other thing that I really, really love about our program is our summer semester. And that summer semester is just an internship period. So we will arrange for a 5-week drinking water internship and a 5-week wastewater internship for our students prior to graduation. That works really, really well in the sense that they're allowed to gain real world experience. The municipalities and businesses that we work with love it because if they've got open positions, it ends up being a kind of a try before you buy situation. And our whole goal with these internships is we try to put the students in these internships where they could potentially turn into a job if the students perform well in that 10-week internship. And with some of the larger companies, when you're talking about the St. Louis Metropolitan Sewer District, or you're talking Missouri American Water out of St. Louis, that really is the case. A lot of those turn into positions. We sent 4 students to Missouri American Water St. Louis last semester or last year, and all 4 of those students were hired in the summer upon completion of their internship. So it is a really, really good program. And that's another thing that I can't stress enough for any college students that are on the call. Even if you're not going the water or wastewater route, there is nothing that will serve you better than some sort of internship in the industry in which you want to work, both for gaining knowledge and for just kind of showing a particular business or company what you are capable of. It's amazing how often that turns into a position. And a lot of times it can even turn into a position when there isn't a position available. If you do a really, really good job, a lot of times they will try to find a way to keep you. Our programs of study in the fall and spring semester kind of mirror each other a little bit. So we do wastewater operations in 2 sections through both semesters, drinking water supply operations, water quality laboratory in both. In the fall semester, we'll do mechanical maintenance. I also teach water quality mathematics and science. And then we'll do electrical maintenance, system maintenance, and water quality communications in the spring. The water quality communications was something that we added relatively recently, just within the past 4 or 5 years, or at least we modified the way that one was done. And we quickly came to the conclusion that we were doing a great job of training potential water and wastewater operators, but we weren't doing a great job of preparing them for resumes, cover letters, phone interviews, in-person interviews, what they could potentially expect. And so we were training great operators, but we weren't giving them all the tools that they needed to succeed with actually getting their foot in the door in the first place. And that is one beautiful thing about being associated with the university is we can utilize our career development center. We can go through a mock interview process. If the students have a bad interview in them, their bad interview is with me and not with a potential job on the line. And that's kind of always our goal. And so we are able to give them a lot of insight and prepare them so that they are in a good position once they complete our program. So now we'll just kind of get into the program a little bit and describe each of those individual classes. So here we've got 2 of our students from this year, and they are working at an aeration tank, so activated sludge treatment in this particular example, and they're essentially just doing some cleaning. Kind of the way that this aeration tank works, and I'll get into it in a little bit more depth, but essentially what we're trying to do here, you'll see there's a lot of air and movement that's happening. You'll see kind of like a little deflector plate here. So essentially we've got air diffusers down low, we're shooting air up, we're deflecting it off of this plate, and we're creating kind of like a circular rolling action. And the whole goal with that is we want to create an environment of nice, strong dissolved oxygen. When we're talking about an activated sludge process, and I'm going to horribly oversimplify here when I talk about the difference between wastewater and drinking water, but as a general rule of thumb, a wastewater process, when you're talking activated sludge, is a biological process. When we're talking about the drinking water side, that's almost always going to be chemical feed. So that's going to be a chemical process. And so here in this activated sludge process, what we're trying to do is we're just trying to create an environment where we grow the right types of microorganisms that will take care of treating the water for us. So here's just kind of a quick diagram, quick and dirty diagram of just general wastewater operation progression. So you would have your wastewater influent that comes in. You would have some sort of grit screen, some sort of screening process. Might have bar screens to take care of some of the larger stuff, grit screenings to take care of a little bit of the smaller stuff. But here we're just trying to remove some of the bigger items. Your wastewater would then move on to a primary settling tank, and that's really exactly what it is. All that we're doing is slowing the water down to a very, very slow pace and allowing a lot of the heavy stuff to settle. So in this grit screening and primary process, a lot of times you can take care of about 50% of the solids through that process. We're then kind of taking that supernatant water off of the top and moving it onto that activated sludge process. And when it gets to that activated sludge process, this is a situation where we're controlling the amount of flow going through. We are controlling the amount of bacteria that can potentially be returned. We are controlling the oxygen that's available. And we're hoping to create an environment where we can grow the right types of microorganisms to treat the water for us. The water will then move on to a final settling tank. In this case, we'll have a lot of sludge that will accumulate on the bottom. We have the option of sending that away for processing and disposal, or we have the option of returning some of that sludge back to the activated sludge process. And a lot of times when you hit these final settling tanks, the bacteria that have had plenty of food, i.e. the waste, to work with as they go through the activated sludge process, when they hit these final settling tanks, a lot of times they'll start reaching a point of starvation. And so what you can do is you can return some of that starved bacteria back to the head of your activated sludge process and kind of reutilize it and work the process all over again. After the final settling, a lot of times there will be some sort of disinfection that's required. A lot of that kind of depends on whether or not you are operating in a what they would deem as an environment where when the water is being discharged, it's a recreational season for a particular lake or stream. And then that water is discharged and monitored. Now, with all of the sludge that is collected, you have the option of recycling some of that centrate, so taking some of the water there off the top and taking that to the primary settling tank. And then the sludge disposal itself, there's a bunch of different options. If you're at St. Louis MSD, they do an incineration process prior to taking to a landfill. You'll have some that do caking and drying, and they'll do land application. A lot of benefits and a lot of nutrients available in that sludge, so a lot of times that works really, really well. But there are plenty of ways to handle that process. And this is kind of just a very, very general working of how wastewater operations works. Now I'll get just slightly more technical here, and I'm just going to give an example of when we're talking about that activated sludge process, about some of the workings of the microorganisms working together for potential treatment. So anytime you have a wastewater plant that is going to be discharging to the environment, there will be an NPDES permit, and that stands for National Pollution Discharge Elimination Systems Permit. And that's your regulatory permit that will have all of the information on it that will tell you what you have to abide by. Basically going to tell you the limits for any of the items that need to be tested. So here we'll just kind of use ammonia as our example, and we'll go through the process of nitrification. So if you have ammonia in your wastewater, which all wastewater is going to have ammonia in it, and you do have ammonia regulation, so you need to find some way to break that down. Well, the presence of a nitrous amonis bacteria, as long as you've got ammonia and dissolved oxygen in that water, along with that ammonia oxidizing bacteria, you will be able to break down that ammonia and convert it over to a nitrite, along with some hydrogens and some electrons that they'll utilize for energy. So here, we've gone through the nitrification process with nitrous amonis, and we've broken that ammonia down from an ammonia to a nitrite. Anytime those nitrous amonis bacteria are present, and there are other bacteria that will also do that same initial nitrification process of ammonia to nitrite breakdown. Anytime you have those present, you'll also have some nitrite oxidizing bacteria that are present. And in this case, the example that I've given is a nitrobacter. And what they're going to do is another process where they're going to take that nitrite. So essentially, they're taking the waste from the nitrous amonis bacteria, along with the water that is present. They're able to oxidize, and you'll create a nitrate along with some hydrogens and some electrons. So here we're at a point where we've converted all the way from ammonia to nitrate. And then kind of the last step is a denitrification process. And so we wouldn't want to be, in theory, be discharging a bunch of nitrates into the environment because, again, we could have issues with blooms. So in this instance, we're able to take that nitrate, utilization of denitrifying bacteria, we're able to convert that nitrate to a nitrogen gas and water. And that nitrogen gas can then off-gas. And so this has kind of been the process that you would find in this activated sludge process for the removal of ammonia. You would have nitrous ammonious bacteria to convert from ammonia to nitrite, nitrobacter bacteria to convert from nitrite to nitrate, and then denitrifying bacteria that can convert the nitrate over to a nitrogen gas, which can then be off-gassed. This is just one example of one analyte. This can happen a bunch of different ways with a bunch of different analytes, depending on the bacteria that are present in your wastewater system. Now, one thing I also like mentioning here is just because a process is great in one situation doesn't mean it's great in another situation. And so when I'm talking wastewater and I'm talking nitrification, and we're going from ammonia to nitrite and nitrite to nitrate, that's a great thing. If I'm talking about drinking water and we're doing that same thing with free ammonia that's present, now all of a sudden we start having nitrification issues. And so it's not really a one size fits all. A process that's great on the wastewater side ends up being very, very detrimental in distribution systems on the drinking water side. So here's a shot of students from, let's see, this one would have been 2021, I believe. Nope, 2020 on this one. And so this is a group of students just around our drinking water filter. And so I'll get into kind of just the drinking water operations portion of it here. And essentially what we've got here is just kind of like a small schematic, and this is courtesy of AWWA. And this is basically just showing a small schematic of a potential water treatment plant. And essentially what you're doing is you're going to have some sort of source water. Sometimes it's going to be surface water, which would be a lake, a stream, a river. Sometimes it's going to be a groundwater. Sometimes it's going to be something which could potentially be a combination of both. So if you have groundwater that's very, very close to a river, lake, or stream, they might be under the influence of that stream if they're or of that lake or river if they're relatively shallow. And so you could get a funky little combination of surface water and drinking or in groundwater if you have groundwater that is under the direct influence of surface water. So you have the surface water, which will pump its way through. It's brought into our initial basins, and generally speaking, if we're talking about surface water, we're going to go through some sort of process of coagulation and flocculation before we go through settling and filtration. And so when I say coagulation and flocculation, essentially when we're dealing with surface water, one of the main analytes that's measured and that we have to worry about removal on is the turbidity in that water. Technical definition for turbidity is cloudiness. A more primitive definition would be basically just the stuff that's floating around in the water. So it can be particles, it can be color, it can be a lot of different things with respect to turbidity. So we need to try to remove this turbidity. That's done through the process of coagulation. And a lot of times it really is just operating off of charge. So as a general rule of thumb, the vast majority of your turbidity particles are going to be anionic. So they are going to carry a negative charge. Thus, vast majority of the coagulants that we feed for the coagulation process are going to be cationic or positively charged. And a lot of them are going to be very, very heavy. So generally speaking, we'll utilize like an aluminum sulfate or a ferric chloride. So some sort of heavy metal. And essentially what happens is, I was kind of describing that flash mix initially. You have your turbidity, your influent water that comes in. It's got your turbidity particles present. You're able to feed your chemicals, and you're going to spin that water as fast as you possibly can for a very, very short duration. What that's going to do is it's going to cause all of those coagulants to collide with those turbidity particles. Those opposite charges will attract, and they'll kind of start forming larger clumps. Now, as you move those coagulants onto a flocculation process and you go to a more slow stirring, what will happen is a turbidity particle that is bound to, let's say, alum, they'll start clumping together with other turbidity particles that are bound with alum. And we'll reach a point where they become more dense and heavier than water, and they'll just sink to the bottom. So essentially, that really is the process, generally speaking, of surface water drinking water treatment, is we are feeding chemicals, We are making sure that those chemicals come in contact with those turbidity particles, making sure that all that stuff that we're feeding is heavy. We're able to make larger particles through that flocculation process, and then our stuff will settle out. Now that'll take care of a lot of the turbidity. We go through that settling process, and then we will have to go through some sort of filtration process. And in the United States, we are required, and I'd be interested to hear from anybody else from any other countries as to requirements that they're currently sitting on, but we are still required to carry some sort of chlorine residual in our distribution system for protection, bacteriological protection. Now, that holds true regardless of what your disinfection process is at your plant. So if you use ozone for disinfection, if you use UV for disinfection, even if you aren't utilizing chlorine for disinfection at your plant, once your water is sent out, you have to add some sort of chlorine. You have to maintain chlorine out in that distribution system, because just because your water is safe when it leaves the plant doesn't mean that there's some sort of potential situation where you could result in bacterial contamination out in the field. And so like a very simple example of this is anytime we're dealing with a water tower, there's going to be some sort of open air vent associated to that water tower so that when the pumps come on, we don't collapse that water tower. The second that you have some sort of open air vents, we have some sort of potential for bacterial contamination. So the rationale in the United States is to carry some sort of chlorine residual out in that distribution system so that we are protected against that bacterial contamination. Now, in the US, we operate at, when you're on a free chlorine residual, they have to carry at least 0.2 parts per million. When they are on a chloramine residual, they have to carry at least 0.5. Those are the federal regulations. The states can kind of make modifications based off of that. And I'll get more into the regulations here in just a second. But at minimum, we have to follow those federal regulations. So here's a picture of one of our former students, Brian, working in our drinking water and wastewater laboratories. Our laboratories themselves, I would deem them more as process control laboratories than heavy analytical laboratories. We will get into some more analytical stuff, but the main purpose of the drinking water labs and the wastewater labs that we have at our Environmental Resources Training Center is for students to be able to collect samples on our pilot plant, go back, get a fairly quick result. I mean, obviously, if you're running a 5-day BOD or bacteriological samples that take 24 hours, that's not a very quick result. But whether we're talking about turbidities, whether we're talking about pHs, some jar testing, we can get some relatively quick results through those processes. And we can utilize that information to make adjustments to our plant so that we can optimize our treatment. So anytime I talk drinking water or wastewater laboratories, that's always a good time to kind of get into some regulations. And so I'll talk a little bit about drinking water regulations, and then we'll kind of get into some more potential problems and topics here in a little bit, whether we're sitting on the drinking water side of the fence or whether we're sitting on the wastewater side of the fence. So the first thing I always like mentioning is just kind of breaking down how the regulatory structure works in the United States. And so you have the federal regulations that are put out there by the federal EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And those are kind of the minimum. And so those have to be adhered to by everyone. Then you have state regulations, and the states are allowed to make their own regulations. However, they can't do anything to circumvent those EPA regulations. So they can make regulations, but the regulations that are made by the states have to be more strict than the federal regulations that are made by EPA. And when we're talking about these states that have taken over primacy from federal EPA and are able to regulate their states individually, it really does differ from state to state which actual department, which actual group is in control of that. And so here in Illinois, we actually have our Illinois EPA, so our Illinois Environmental Protection Agency is who manages drinking water and wastewater regulations. When I was out in California, for the drinking water side, they had a separate Department of Drinking Water. So that would be the DDW. I deal a lot with Missouri. Missouri operates through the Department of Natural Resources, are the agency that deals with water and wastewater regulations. And then in my dealings with Texas, they were actually operating under the Commission of Environmental Quality. So it really does differ heavily with respect to who in your state is responsible for this. But any state that has taken over primacy will have some sort of branch that is responsible. And then kind of like the last item that you can have, and this is not enforceable, but this is just some sort of third party or internal targets. And so when I worked with American Water, we were part of Partnership for Safe Drinking Water. And so we maintained much lower turbidity, discharge or effluent turbidity standards than were required just to be part of that group. And then we had a lot of internal targets also that we tried to adhere to. But this is kind of like the basic structure for how it's enforced. Now, the next question will be, so how are we deciding what to test, what levels to test, how to regulate? And that's all done through UCMR. And what UCMR stands for is the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule. And that was kind of put into place as a subset of that Safe Drinking Water Act. And what we're doing here is we're just kind of finding suspected contaminants that currently don't have any health-based standards. And we're trying to get some information on those items so that we can determine whether or not they do need to be regulated. And so this is a process that happens every 5 years. They're currently on their 5th cycle, so 2002 to 2006, they're on this cycle number 5. And a lot of times what they'll do is whatever is the hot button topic in the industry will be something that they're focusing on. And so this go around, we're looking at some of our, we'll put in quotes, our forever compounds, the PFASs. And so they've got 30 different things that they're testing for. 29 of them are PFASs. So this is really their primary focus here. And the main reason they're going after these varieties of PFASs is just the length of time that they spend in the environment. They really are, I mean, they're not a true forever compound, but they really take an extremely long period of time to break down. There's all kinds of potential hazards, whether they be reproductive, whether they be with respect to brain function, whether they be with cancer causing, tons of potential issues there. And then lithium is kind of like the one oddball, the one item that they went with that wasn't a PFAS. And then kind of here's just a table that I was able to pull from the federal EPA website. And this just kind of lets you know what the monitoring scope is. And so the main reason I like pulling this table is to just let everybody know that whether we're talking small systems or large systems, so we're talking small systems and we're at 3,300 or higher, if you are supplied by a water system that is 3,300 or higher, regardless of what type of system it is, whether it's surface water, groundwater under the direct influence, some sort of mixed or some sort of groundwater system, you are included in this. So every place that services at least 3,300 people will be required to go through this UCMR testing. Small systems that are fewer than 3,300, now there's an outside chance that you might not be involved because they do just randomly select 800 different systems that fall in that category to conduct this testing. Now, this is the testing where a lot of times they'll find or they'll come up with analyzation of the presence of these chemicals. They'll do a little additional research to determine, okay, at what levels are these potential problems? And a lot of times they'll come out with primary MCLs, secondary MCLs. In some cases, they come out with advisory levels. But they're able to come up with a bunch of different ways to alert the public of the potential threat and hazard, along with finding some sort of way to make sure that the water or the drinking water plant itself is treating for that chemical and not exceeding any of these maximum contaminant levels. Now, with drinking water regulations, this one ends up being a really, really fine dance. And it wasn't really until I really got into the weeds on some of this when I was in California that I realized how in-depth this gets. It really isn't just as simple as this chemical is bad, and so we need to make sure that we treat for it and get rid of it. I really wish it was that simple, because then we could just kind of treat for everything and follow that route. But it isn't. And so, like, the first example that I'll give will be something that was done by the EPA. And so PFOA and PFOS were kind of the first two PFAS compounds that they really started doing some sort of advisory for. And what the EPA did initially was they came out with a health advisory level for those two contaminants. And the combination of them was set at 70 parts per billion. And they came up with that rule, but they didn't come up with it as a maximum contaminant level. They came up with it as that health advisory level. And that ends up being a very, very slippery slope for anybody that is working in the drinking water industry and trying to determine what to do with that. Because when you have a health advisory level, that's not enforceable. And so by putting out something that's not enforceable, we were in a really, really strange position at California American Water. Because when I would go and we would have town hall meetings and I'd talk with customers, you would have some that were really worried about it, saying, well, EPA is saying that this is a health advisory level, you guys need to treat for this. And that's a very, very valid point. And I would probably side with that camp. But then I had others that would say, well, if it's not enforceable, you're going to raise my rates for something that they don't even have an MCL on. It's just an advisory level. So you had two different schools of camps. You had the people that were worried about their drinking water rates going up, which a lot of times ends up being everybody. And then you were worried about the people that were worried about the safety of the drinking water itself. So it ends up being a weird little realm to live in. The other potential problem that you can run into with this, and when we're talking about federal to the state level, is the feds had a recommendation level for chromium. In 2014, the state of California put out an MCL specifically for chromium-6, so specifically for hexavalent chromium. And that particular regulation set the hexavalent chromium MCL, state MCL, at 10 parts per billion. With that, fast forward to about 3 years, and that MCL was actually overturned by a state judge. And that state judge ruled that the regulation failed to consider the economic feasibility of treating for that chromium-6. And so where I'd love to say it really is just a situation of chromium-6 is bad, we have to treat it, it gets way more in depth than that. And so I'm just going to throw numbers out here, and these aren't true real numbers, but these are just for example's sake. And what I'm going to say is, let's say in theory, chromium-6, when they do their calculations, they determine that it affects 1 in 100,000 people. So chronic exposure to chromium-6, some sort of cancer-causing agent, 1 in 100,000 people will develop cancer based off of their testing and their prediction. If the money that is spent and the increase in rates that comes into play for the installation of an apparatus that would treat this chromium-6, if that ends up being excessive, and now all of a sudden you have a low-income community that maybe doesn't have a lot of spare money anyway, and what spare money they do have, they can maybe get by with having a gym membership, and maybe they can get by with eating a little healthier. Now all of a sudden you raise their water rates, and in some cases, when you're talking about small systems for this one, they were anticipating up to $38 additional on your bill. One of the places that I saw in California, it was actually a very small mobile home park. They had chromium-6 in their well water. Generally speaking, you're probably talking about $1 million to treat it for the initial construction to treat it. And it would have been spread. I'm trying to recoup $1 million over 220 different customers is almost an impossibility at a normalized rate. But what we end up having is if we have these rates go up and now all of a sudden people are eating less healthy, people aren't attending the gym, does that affect more than the 1 in 100,000 that the chromium-6 affects? So it's not always as simple as just, okay, it's bad, let's treat for it. There actually has to be some sort of economic feasibility study that's done to determine, okay, by treating for it, is that our best play, or are we better not treating for it because we get ill effects in other dimensions if we do treat for it? Kind of the last couple that we do are mechanical maintenance. And we aren't heavy in mechanical maintenance here, and a lot of that is for liability's sake. But we are at least able to introduce our students into the realm of mechanical maintenance through our program. And a lot of times if they get hired on at a water or wastewater facility, they'll go through some sort of additional vocational training school for that maintenance, more specifically if they want to do like electrical or something along those lines. And then here's just kind of our mock distribution system and collection system. We'll get a lot of students that maybe previously had landscaping backgrounds or construction backgrounds, and the operations isn't really for them. but they would like working out in the field constantly. So we've got this distribution system and collection system that's set up. Obviously, it's not real world. It's not, they're not having to deal with the elements. It's not underground, but it does give them the opportunity to learn how to tap pipe, install water mains, fix a main break, superchlorinate for bringing a new main into service. All of these aspects are able to be covered through our distribution system and collection system. So kind of what we try to do through our program is we'll try to make sure that all aspects of positions in the water industry are covered. If somebody wants to be an operator, we're helping them to train as an operator. If they want to work in the laboratory, if they want to work out in the field for distribution system, collection system, if they want to do maintenance, all of those are opportunities that we offer. Upon completion of our program, as long as they can test into it, in the state of Illinois, they can actually leave with 3 different drinking water or 3 different certifications, Class C drinking water, Class 4 wastewater, and then a collection system certification for wastewater. And then on the Missouri side of the fence, they're eligible for Class D drinking water, Class D wastewater, and then a distribution DS1 operator license. And generally speaking, what we do is we offer some these basic certification exams in December. And for any of the students that pass in December, they get another opportunity to upgrade their certifications in April. If for any reason they pass or fail in December, they're going to get a second opportunity to take the tests in April. So as I kind of mentioned early on, even though we are part of Southern Illinois University Edwardsville, we're more or less a vocational trade school. And with that comes a whole bunch of challenges. The main challenge would be that about we're probably longer than that now, probably about 8 or 9 years ago, the federal government eliminated student government loans for vocational trade schools. And so it makes it very difficult, especially for any students that are underserved or low income to get loans to go through our program. And so what we try to do, and we try our very best to, is to form as many collaborations as we can with different organizations, different businesses, to try to reduce costs or completely eliminate costs to attend our program and to go through that program. And so we've got a fantastic working relationship with the St. Louis MSD. When I first started here, we gave 3 partial scholarships. They turned the 3 partial scholarships into 1 full ride. They then turned the 1 full ride into 2 full rides. As of this year, they turned the 2 full rides into 3 full rides. So they are giving 3 full scholarships to students. And the main reason that they're doing this is to just increase the diversity of their workforce. And so heavily underserved with respect to females in the water and wastewater industry, and then relatively underserved with respect to minorities in the water and wastewater industry. So any of our students that apply and are accepted into our program, if they meet either one of those 2 criteria, either being minority or being female, they are eligible to apply for this MSD scholarship. And it does work really well. It's a situation where a lot of times it'll take a student from a very low income environment, allow them to go through our program in 11 months and give them a position that they, with respect to the pay, that they wouldn't have envisioned in their wildest dreams. I mean, we will get some that'll be, like I said, be starting out at $55,000, $60,000, $65,000 a year, essentially coming from nothing. So it is a really great program that we have going with MSD. We're trying to get something similar put in place with Illinois American Water, trying to get another item similar to with Missouri American Water. It really is a great program, and it's really something that I hope that we'll be able to build and advance on with some other organizations. We also have some additional scholarships, and a lot of these have kind of been just either come from private or separate organizations or from individuals themselves. So John LaRocca, in memory of his father, set up an Anthony J. LaRocca Memorial Scholarship. The Illinois Water and Environmental Association set up the Sylvanus Jackson Memorial Award for our ERTC program. Captain Mike Curry and Curry and Associates set up the Patrick Curry Memorial Scholarship. And then we've also got scholarships that roll through some of the drinking water and wastewater organizations in the state of Illinois. So Southwest Central Water Plant Operators Association, the Mississippi Kaskaskia Valley for wastewater operators, and then the Illinois Association of Waste Professional Control Operators also. So here's kind of from my first year here. These are two success stories that I always really like mentioning. Ariel at the top, she actually went through our program on the MSD scholarship. She has taken it and really run with it. So environmental resources training student, she went through her internship at the Metropolitan Sewer District in St. Louis, was hired on immediately at the conclusion of her internship. And she's taken full advantage of what St. Louis MSD has to offer with respect to going back to school for a 4-year degree, taking advantage of that tuition reimbursement. And she's also over on the laboratory environmental compliance side now. So she is able to find a realm that she really wanted to work in. And then down at the bottom is Chris. Similar, he went through our program, and he's currently working his way up at Missouri American Water. So he started out as a wastewater operator in Fenton. He's currently operating as an assistant operator at the Florissant, Missouri plant. So as kind of mentioned before, a really good program that can quickly get individuals, especially individuals that either aren't really ready or prepared for a 4-year school initially if they're young, or individuals that have been bouncing from job to job, they're mid-late 20s, they really want to find some sort of career, but need to find some quick way to get into a career. Those are kind of like the two realms that most of our students sit in. That third realm would probably be something along the lines of displaced worker that goes through like a WIOA program or something along those lines in order to just find a new career path. Here's another success story we have from Aaron. So just kind of mention it, and if you were to just take a quick look at this and read through this, this is I'm not going to say our typical student, but this is not an outlier. We get a lot of people that are in this exact situation where, you know, they're just working dead-end jobs. They don't really have a path to go down. And then we give them an opportunity as well as a lot of connections. All of those certifications help extensively with respect to putting them in a position for success. And she's currently working as a wastewater collection foreman in Wentzville, Missouri. I also kind of mentioned our in-service operators. So up to this point, I've been talking about our water quality control operations program. So getting people into the industry themselves. We also do some stuff for in-service. And so I mentioned we'll do certification exam preparation for anybody that wants to advance their certifications. So a lot of times that's just an upgrade to their current certification. It might be for wage increase. It might be for a new position. It might be for reclassification of their plant. They may just want additional certifications. So if they are working in a municipality that also has wastewater and they are only drinking water certified, they may also want to get certified as a wastewater operator. And we do this, we were always archaic, I guess would be the best way to put it. It was basically just in person and correspondence. And blessing in disguise with the COVID pandemic is it quickly made us go a more technologically advanced route. And so we do a lot of virtual trainings now. In fact, almost all of our drinking water trainings are done virtually at this point, which works really well, because previously when we were offering items in person in the state of Illinois, you were location limited. So we were only able to service little pockets of Illinois, or else we were forcing somebody to travel to a place and spend extra money in order to attend our sessions. Whereas having this virtual option, it opens it up for everybody all across the state. With respect to continuing education, as I mentioned, they could have anywhere from 15 to 30 hours of requirements to maintain those certifications. And we're kind of talking with them and training them on any type of regulation change also. So most recently, when Illinois came out with their nitrification action plan regulation change, we went throughout the state and trained them on what was going to be needed in order to maintain compliance with that rule. And then we'll also talk to them about potential technological and industry changes. Last step is kind of the plumber's realm. So here is our cross-connection control device inspector certification. So essentially, when I'm talking about cross-connection control devices, anytime you're dealing with business, or even if you're just dealing with a house, you always have to find some way to protect that distribution system. And so if you have a completely open distribution system and the water can kind of free flow from a business and back to the distribution system, you're putting that distribution system at risk based off of any backflow or cross-connection contamination that may occur at that system. And so we have these cross-connection control devices that are put into place. And essentially what they are is a series of 2 check valves that will allow the water to flow in one direction, but not allow the water to flow back. So if we're selling water to a, well, let's just say it's a large warehouse, water's being sold through a warehouse, it goes through this apparatus. And then because it's a warehouse, a lot of that water is just collected in a fire system, and the water just sits there. It can become stagnant, it can lose chlorine, have bacteriological concerns. If for some reason we had a main break and we didn't have one of these backflow preventers in place, that water could back siphon back into the distribution system, and there could be an issue with potential contamination. By having these cross-connection control devices in place, when that back siphonage begins to occur, once that water hits that check valve, it will no longer be able to pass into the distribution system. So it really is just a protection for our distribution system. I think I'm about, so we're at 9:40. So this is going to be kind of my last slide, and I always like ending with this one just because it's probably the one that opens up best for conversation. And that's just kind of a slide pertaining to like some of the water issues that we're currently facing. And in the United States, there are several, unfortunately. So a lot of them are going to be infrastructure related. And we do a really good job of building stuff, but then we haven't done a very good job of whether it be bridges, whether it be roads, whether it be drinking water, wastewater infrastructure. We haven't done a great job of upkeep. And a lot of this is just because when it's underground, a lot of times it's out of sight, out of mind. You don't realize there's a problem until you actually have an issue. And so drinking water with respect to aging mains and equipment, I'm sure if we're just talking about like more recent topics, some of the issues in Jackson, Mississippi that occurred in 2022, a lot of that was dependent, or a lot of that was due to just the age of their equipment, and some of that backup failure that occurred, which put some of those poor people in essentially what ended up being about a month-long boil order. We have the lead service line issues, which obviously Flint, Michigan was the location for all of those major issues, and that's kind of worked its way throughout the nation now. We do have like lead service line replacement programs and stuff like that that are being implemented at the state level kind of across the board. On the wastewater side, a lot of our older sewer systems, St. Louis as an example, they're combined sewer systems. So essentially what ends up happening is the stormwater system and the wastewater system are combined. So in situations of heavy rain events, they actually send too much wastewater to the wastewater plants to be able to handle. And so a lot of times what they end up having to do is some sort of blended treatment, some sort of bypass treatment. And a lot of times water is sent to the river that hasn't been treated properly. When we're talking drinking water supply and quality, water shortages, been a fairly strong topic here in the US. Lake Mead is probably the one that people are will most recognize with respect to water shortages. Unfortunately, the vast majority of population in the US kind of exists along the coast and not necessarily near our major rivers or near our major lakes. And so we do have that issue. Legionella, nitrification, PFS, whether we're talking about the actual quality of the water. When we're talking wastewater discharges, some of the phosphates that are discharged, pharmaceuticals in wastewater has been another one that's been a pretty hot button topic. We've got a chemistry professor here that does a lot of work with testing for pharmaceuticals in wastewater. And then just the runoff in the waste from nitrogen compounds, which can cause algal blooms. Salts from a lot of that is especially here in the Midwest. Anytime we are salting our roads, you'll get a lot of that salt runoff that'll occur after the first major event after a road salting. Oil and gas had problems with it in 1969 on the Cuyahoga River. We're still having issues with it. And then microplastics is another thing that most recently has really come into the forefront. And just that small breakdown of the plastics that are floating around in our waterways that have caused some problems. So that will kind of close out my presentation. Here's our contact information for both myself and for our ERTC office. And Desmond, I'd like to just go ahead and open it up to anybody that might have any questions. If they want to talk about the program, great. If they want to talk just more water or wastewater related items, I'm open to that as well.
So thank you so very much. Shane has to leave pretty quickly, but
Yes.
can you go ahead and ask your question, make a comment?
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, Professor Murray. Matt, I wanted to say thank you so very much for your presentation. I chuckled when you said your colleague says, you train dogs, you don't train people.
Right.
So thank you very much for that. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to mention to you is that in the Caribbean, so we have a similar organization to the ERTC. It's called the Caribbean Water and Sewerage Association, or CAWASA for short, CAWASA. And they actually also provide water training and wastewater training. So I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity for you to connect. The executive director there is Ignatius Jean, but they are on, once you type in CAWASA in Google, it comes up.
Beautiful.
So it would be awesome for you to connect, and maybe if there are opportunities to have student exchanges as well. You know, they're based in St. Lucia, so it's a good trip
Oh, yeah.
to come to the Caribbean, right?
Yeah. Talking people to go from, or trying to get someone to come from St. Lucia to Edwardsville is going to be a lot tougher sell than getting them to go from Edwardsville to St. Lucia, right?
Yes. So I wanted to mention that because I just felt that that's an awesome opportunity for connection. To say thank you again, guys. Dr. Murray would love to do this again. Hopefully I don't have to rush off because my meeting that was supposed to be yesterday got scheduled to today. So that's why I have to run off. But guys, I see Mary Alice has a question, so I'm leaving you in the very, very capable hands of Dr. Murray as usual. So feel free to ask Matt tons of questions and enjoy the rest of your Friday and your weekend. We are in the throes of carnival, so this weekend is party. Not for me,
yes. Okay, thank you so very much, and we'll be in touch.
Welcome. Yes.
Okay.
Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.
Now she knows she's a hard act to follow.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate this. I've been in and out, but I heard you touch base on something that raises like a red flag to me with our filtration plant and the alternative that we had to choose, that I'm sure you may have heard of. You're over in Illinois, I think I heard you mention. Illinois. Have you guys ever went through something like that? And what was the economic impact that you all incurred or endured? And what do you know, to your knowledge, was done to, I mean, when the water rates went up in any city that you've dealt with, what was the outcome for you all?
Yeah, so, yeah, and probably the hardest part of the water and wastewater industry is managing it properly with respect to providing a safe, clean, like on the drinking water side, to provide a safe, clean drinking water that meets or exceeds all of those, all of the regulations, but then still doing that cost effectively. And that is a very, very difficult dance. And it becomes an even more difficult dance just based off of the area. And what I mean by that is, so like when I was in Sacramento, we had 12 different districts, and parts of the, like some of those districts were very affluent districts, and other districts were very, very low income and had some issues with respect to financials. And we operated under, and I understand why it's done, but we operated under a Sacramento rate case. And what they did was they combined all 12 of those districts into one large rate base, and everybody paid the same rates. Regardless of what water treatment was done in your individual localized area, everybody was paying the same rates. And initially, you get a lot of pushback from that. And the reason you get pushback from that is you'll have some people that'll say, well, you just installed a $1.5 million granular activated carbon treatment well, and that's at a different district. I'm not even going to get that water. Why am I paying higher rates for that? And the main reason that it's done that way is anytime we can increase the amount of people, like anytime we can spread the money out over a large amount of people, we can limit the fluctuations in the rates. And so that was one of they actually took it one step further in California and went away from a Sacramento rate case and actually went to a northern division, a central division, and a southern division rate case, where they were able to spread all of that money across. And so what ends up happening is, yeah, that's true. If you were a person that wasn't in the area where this $1.5 million project was done, you are seeing maybe a $2 increase in your rates because of that project. But for the people that were in that area, if for any reason we weren't able to spread that cost around or across that larger rate base, they might have seen a $50, $60, $70 increase for just their area. And so that's the rationale that they utilize. And that's one thing that I think was beneficial when they went that route. Now,
it actually makes sense. And I just never could understand why Benton Harbor had to incur the cost of the plant improvements, including with some surrounding areas that pulled out after the money was received, after the negotiation happened. And if we went to them, they would raise the rate on us. It seems to be something illegal about that transaction. But after it happened, we went into receivership with the emergency management. In my other understanding, we have a connector for St. Joe. I know for sure that if something happened over there and they didn't have access to their water, that they could tap right into ours and utilize it. And,
yes.
and I'm hoping, I don't know if it's vice versa, but something is really wrong with this picture. But I think that's the type of negotiation that we need to be looking at right now. What did you call it? What did you call it?
With respect,
there was a name that for all of the municipalities that you mentioned.
Okay, yeah, and Mary Alice, this is where it gets really, really difficult. And why it gets so difficult is I was talking about California American Water. So we had a bunch of different districts that we could utilize that spread. So essentially we are private industry that is running these that we're running these 12 districts in the Sacramento area. And we would be, for lack of better terminology, I guess we're a regulated monopoly, right? People don't have they don't have a different drinking water option. They're going to be supplied by us if they want water supplied to them. But we are regulated by a rates commission in California, so we can't just charge whatever we want to charge. When you're talking about a municipality, all of that money kind of just stays in-house and just is dependent on the government system, the governmental system of that municipality. And generally speaking, they're not going to answer to a rate commission. And so they basically, I'm not going to say they can kind of do whatever they want, but based off of whatever costs they incur for management of and for improvements of that system, those costs ultimately, unless they can find some way to some of the bigger businesses in the area to pick up a larger chunk, that number gets passed on to the consumer itself. Now, with respect to your interconnects, a lot of those, and those I'm always a strong advocate for any type of interconnect, whether it be an emergency interconnect with somebody else, or whether it be just a continuous interconnect, just in order to supply consistent water to an area. I always think that's a good play, because that basically is just a great backup plan. And it can go, generally speaking, when you're talking about it, interconnect, Ms. Adams, it can go both ways. And so,
okay, but I'm wondering if ours actually does, because we had a break from our water reserve that overflowed and emptied out, and we were without water for days. So why could we not connect or receive water from St. Joe?
Yeah, and that I don't. Yeah, I don't have a great answer to that.
You just made me think about. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate you, Matthew.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right, I see Pat, you have your hand up.
Question. what happens to the water? You separate your water. One comes from your wastewater treatment plant, and another set of water is from your rivers and groundwater. What happens to the water from the wastewater treatment plant? Where does it go?
Sure. So the water from the wastewater treatment plant, they'll have generally speaking, there will be a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit that will govern where they can discharge and the limits that they can discharge with respect to quantity and with respect to the water quality characteristics itself. So generally speaking, and I know a lot of times people don't really like hearing this, but it really is the truth. There is no real new water. Our water is just constantly recycled. And so like a good example of this would be at one of the plants that I worked at previously, there was a wastewater treatment plant that was about probably 1.5 miles upstream from us. Their discharge point was directly to the Missouri River. 1.5 miles later, that water is the influent water that I was bringing in to treat via our drinking water treatment plant there in Missouri. So it really is just a recycle. The wastewater treatment or the wastewater discharge is discharged to either a lake, a pond, a stream, a river, and then that water is just mixed in with the natural water that is already in that body, and then a lot of times brought back in through the influent and treated as drinking water later on.
Great. That answers that question, and it also answers the next question, which is really the water that comes out of your taps in your house, is that is suitable for drinking, or does that have to, that's always suitable for drinking?
Yeah, so in the United States, any of the water that is, unless you have been notified otherwise because they've had some sort of treatment concern or distribution system concern, any of the water that is sent to your house through your water provider is suitable for drinking. So the only time it wouldn't be, like, there are some very, very strange scenarios and even some projects that we have where, like, if you have some sort of wastewater reuse and some of that piping comes in and is specific to just like sprinkler systems or something along those lines, then that would be the case. But any water that comes from a water municipality or a water business that passes through a water meter and comes into your house, all of that water is at a quality such that it's suitable for drinking.
And that answers the third question, which is that you have a water metering system, so you pay for your use of your water.
Correct. Yeah. Generally speaking, it's some sort of tiered system. So there is usually, it varies depending on where you are. Everybody has different water rates based off of the cost of that water treatment. But generally speaking, there will be some sort of charge just to have the meter. And a lot of times there will be like an intro charge where it'll be meter and then up to, and pick whatever number you want, meter plus 3,000 gallons. And then the second that you exceed 3,000 gallons, let's say 3,000 to 5,000 gallons is a different tiered price, 5,000. Right? And so that's kind of how it operates on the residential level. But then when you get into industrial and business, a lot of times there are negotiated rates that operate at a different level based off of their water usage.
Okay, so but the net result is that you don't have to, you can take the water from your tap and you can drink it. You don't have to buy water in the supermarket and things like this in large plastic bottles.
No, you absolutely do not. And so as somebody that's worked in the water industry for a really long time, this is a question that I get quite often. All of the water, it should be, as long as the area that you live in is being honest with the way that they are reporting their results. All of the water that is distributed to you should be safe for drinking. Now, are there going to be some circumstances where it's well water and there happens to be like a little bit of a hydrogen sulfide taste in it? Yeah. Maybe you're not used to chlorine or you don't like having that small chlorine taste. And so it's mainly aesthetic issues, not necessarily issues where you could be harmed from drinking the water if there's some problem with the water. And my recommendation of going that route is always just get something simple like a little carbon filter, like a little Brita will work for removing a lot of the aesthetic issues of the water, but it should be safe to drink. And for your actual location, like the best way to kind of confirm that would be wherever you're living, get online, find out you'll know who you're paying your water bill to. Go to their website. Every year they are required to issue what they refer to as a consumer confidence report. And that is basically all of the testing from the previous year that will talk about all of the water quality. It'll give you all of the analytes that they've had when they did their testing. It'll call out any violations they may have had, but that is an excellent resource that a lot of times kind of goes under the radar. And that is a requirement for anybody here in the United States. They have to have those consumer confidence reports out. Generally speak, like if you were to get online right now and look, you would probably see the consumer confidence report from your organization for 2021. Usually by the summer is when they have to have those reported. So usually probably late June, early July would be when you could see your 2022 report, and that'll give you a complete and total breakdown of everything that is in that water.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed. You've given me quite a lot of ammunition there.
You're welcome, Pat.
Okay. So I wanted to ask about the education/training aspect of this. Is it, where do your students come from? Is it only Illinois? Can students come from other states? And would your degree, certifications and so on, would they be accepted in other states?
Yeah, so Desmond, thanks for asking that question. That's a great question. We get students from everywhere. So we train specifically for Illinois and Missouri, but throughout that training, we are also covering a lot of the other states. And so what ends up happening is when students come to our program, regardless of where they come from. So just an example, I've got someone coming from Brooklyn next year that's going to be coming to our program. Okay. And so that's a good example. And so he'll come here and we will train him to be a water and wastewater operator. He'll test in Illinois, he'll test in Missouri. And then what I'll do is I'll work with the state governing agency in New York. And a lot of times what they'll do is they'll go through a system of reciprocity where a certification in one state is equal to a certification in their state. And he'll be able to just gain a certification in that method. Other times what they'll do is if there isn't a direct reciprocity, they'll acknowledge his training and acknowledge his experience, but they will still tell him, well, okay, we acknowledge that you are qualified to become an operator, but you still have to take our test. Okay. So a lot of times that'll be the route that they take, Desmond. But a good example on that one, in addition, I had, it was the second year that I was here, had a student come down and right out of the gate, whenever I'm talking with our students, I ask, okay, where do you want to do your internship? Because if it's someplace obscure, I need to get going on that fairly quickly, right? Mm-hmm. And so he came down right after I got done speaking, and he was from the Quad Cities area in Illinois, and he just said, well, Matt, I've always wanted to live in Montana. And I said, okay. And so immediately I started working with Montana. And initially I kind of reached out to their regulatory agency. They were able to give me a few different places of people that were looking for operators. And so I contacted them and ended up with one guy that just said, well, yeah, we are actually going to have somebody that retires in the summer. So if he wants to come out here for the internship for those 10 weeks and he does well, then he can just roll right into a job here in Montana. And that's exactly what he did. And then I was able to, Montana was fantastic about it. They did make him have to, forgive me if I get this one wrong. I want to say on the drinking water side, he got reciprocity, but on the wastewater side, he still had to test. But they were excellent with respect to acknowledging his hours. And generally speaking, that is how states will work. So we can always make it work regardless of where the student is coming from.
Okay, that sounds good. So in terms of, just a follow-up before I go back to Mary Ellis. So in terms of what you know, are there similar programs here in Michigan? I don't know. Are you familiar with?
Not really. I don't want to say that we're extremely unique in our on the classroom side of the fence, because there are a lot of places I think that do what we do classroom wise. Okay. And generally speaking, in order to get the experience, what they end up doing is they'll partner with municipalities or businesses in the area for those students to pick up hours working either apprenticeships or internships with those local areas. To the best of my knowledge, there used to be something similar in Neosho, Missouri, but to the best of my knowledge, we're the only place that I know of that has a working pilot scale treatment and wastewater, drinking water and wastewater plant where everything is all done here in-house.
Oh, okay, okay. All right. Mary Ellis?
Thank you, Dr. Murray, for that question, because there's been a lot of talk and funding coming down the pipeline federally for training. And we've been trying to see how we can master at getting some of our high school students involved in taking care of their own water at their own plant. So that's along that. But I guess my question to you, Matthew, would be, are you contractual? Can we get facilitators from your facility? Is that possible if we had a class that was formed vocationally?
Possible, yes.
Okay.
So a lot of that works through kind of the university. We have, like, I mean, I train all throughout Illinois with numerous different organizations. Usually it's done kind of pro bono because a lot of times they'll give me the opportunity to, I kind of utilize it as a potential opportunity for a sales pitch, I guess would be the best way to do it.
But you gave me a great idea because I think that they could probably better study and stick to the study if we had some type of scholarship to send them to you.
Yeah, and that's kind of always the key. And Mary Alice, that's the thing that when I took this position five years ago, and I started realizing that a lot of our students aren't a traditional student, and they aren't necessarily a student where a four-year college would be right for them immediately. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. I totally get it if you're 18 years old and you don't want to make a $150,000-$200,000 a year or $150,000-$200,000 decision on what you want to do.
That are not going to take you into your career.
Right. And so often people will go down a road, like I'm a huge advocate of the STEM side of the fence. But I think a lot of times people will get away from that, and they'll take majors that aren't necessarily economically feasible to pay back the money that they're taking on in loans for the students. And where we'll get a lot of our students, they either aren't ready for college, maybe they're like fiscally, they're from low income, they're worried about paying it back. And so my whole goal when I came here and when I saw our students, which are phenomenal students, by the way, my whole goal is to someday create an environment where I have enough organizations, I have enough industry that is working with me where we can still operate, but nobody has to pay to come here. Where we have enough scholarships where all of this, like anybody that wants to come here can come here for free and better their lives. Like that's the whole goal. And I've seen like this job can get really frustrating sometimes. Where like I'm used to private industry, so like working in the public sector now is very, very strange for me. But the benefit that I get from the way that we are able to better people, the amount of phone calls that I get a year and a half, 2 years after they graduate, just almost in tears. Like I had one student, this is like one of my favorite stories ever. She called me up. So she went through our program, graduated, single mother, called me. Yeah. We get quite a few females surprisingly recently.
Okay,
yeah.
All right.
So she went through our program, called me up about a year after, right about a year after graduating. And she was almost in tears. And she said, Matt, I don't know what to do. And I was getting a little bit worried. And I was like, oh no, what happened, right? And she said, I got my paycheck and I paid for everything and I have a ton of money left over. And she'd never had, but it's like, she's 22 years old, had never had that situation before, right? Like she was always scrounging, always never had enough money. And so to help people.
Dr. Murray knows how to get a hold of you. Can you come and give a presentation to our community at a community forum and bring her with you? Think about that. But I have one more question. You were talking about the wastewater.
Yes.
Okay, so we have you touch base on all the municipalities coming together. I can't figure out why that can't happen, because with our wastewater it is. And my question to you is, they also have the ability to discharge in different areas, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So they control what's discharged where. So
Correct.
they could possibly be discharging more to Benton Harbor than other areas.
It
That
is,
causes us an overload in treatment. Am I right?
so yeah, and again, Mary Alice, without seeing, without like talking with the regulatory agency or seeing their MPDES permits to see what they're allowed to do, I can't answer in specifics.
I know.
What I can tell you is, unless it was deemed an irregular circumstance, so
Yeah.
under just normal operations, they would not be able to just bypass and discharge whatever they want. They would have to be on some sort of combined sewer overflow or have some sort of
Okay.
infiltration during a rain
Okay.
event to do some sort of bypass where they were discharging stuff they weren't supposed to.
Okay.
Okay.
And all of that's regulated, I'm sure.
It is all regulated
And
on a
there's
monthly report.
And we need to be getting those monthly reports.
So the monthly reports, you should, let me, I don't want to misspeak here.
No, I
you
used to see them. I haven't seen some
Okay.
in a long time.
Yeah.
Long time. We're overdue. Okay. Thank you, Matthew. I really appreciate you.
You're welcome, Mary
And
Alice.
hope to see you in Benton Harbor.
I'll see what I can do. I'll
Murray.
talk with Desmond. I'll see what I can do.
Yeah,
Okay.
we
Thank
could,
you.
we could try to make it happen.
Great.
Okay, anybody else? We could probably take one more question before I have to take off and teach a class. Anybody else has a question, comment? All right, well, again, we want to thank you, Matt. This was a really informative presentation, and it has opportunities for many of our students, I'm thinking, and youth to really get a job. I mean, ultimately, that's what you guys do. Within a year of training, a student, a person, a young person could be in a good position, you know,
Yeah.
so that's really good. That's really important. It
Yeah,
would
that's
be
the whole
nice.
goal, is to just change your life quickly. It's kind of the whole goal.
Maybe you should write Biden, because I think he would be attracted to something. His wife teaches at a community college. He's really attracted to these sort of things so that the feds could subsidize vocational. I mean, that's something I'm pretty sure he would consider based on, you know, his approach.
Yeah, and that's something that when they took those away, the federal student loans away from the vocational trade schools, in a roundabout way, they really were potentially affecting like low income personnel, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't think I understand why they did it. You had your Trump University, you had a lot of places that probably weren't great with respect to the certificate that was being administered, and federal loans were being paid for it. So they kind of just did a everybody loses recess kind of situation with it. But it is a situation where, especially when you see how short we are of plumbers, how short we are of electricians, how short we are of carpenters, there's a strong demand in all of the vocational trade fields.
Yeah.
Water operators and wastewater operators falling in that realm as well.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to at least present it to your own representatives so that they could take it to Congress, and at least it needs to be in, you know, debate and all of that. They could do it with some sort of regulation on it to make sure that people are not scamming, you know, the system.
Right.
But yeah. Anyway, that's just another thought from your very excellent presentation. Thank you so very much, and we'll be in touch.
Great. I appreciate it, Desmond. Thank you, everybody.
Desmond.
Okay. Yes.
Desmond, I
Yeah.
have a group of affiliates that are going to Washington next month. I won't be
Okay.
able to go, but what can they do?
Well,
Any
we could write a letter and try to get it to.
Write it and send it to me. I'll make sure they get it.
We'll have to work on it together.
Okay, the
All
18th
right.
of next month, they'll be there.
Okay, so let's talk offline.
Okay, great.
All right, sounds good.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Take
very
care. Have a
much.
great weekend. Bye-bye.
For more information about our sponsors and partners, please visit the Environmental Fridays Partners and Sponsors page. For more Environmental Fridays, visit our website at theenvironmentalfridays.com.